Hello, this is Brad Wild, and today we are in Reno, Nevada. This is Kilo Romeo November Oscar, and we're going to fly over to San Francisco, KSFO, and we're flying in, as you can see, pretty lousy conditions. A runway visual range, where the RVR is about a mile, and we're going to make this flight in total IFR conditions using only VOR. Now, why am I doing this? Well, just to make life interesting. This is the Saab 340A from X-Aviation, and it's been around for a couple of versions of X-Plane, but it was updated for X-Plane 11, and the most recent release was in August of 2018. And this plane is no longer in production. It's old. And you wonder, why do you fly old airplanes? Well, just for, I guess, nostalgia's sake. But this one is particularly immersive and makes it kind of a challenge and also enjoyable. And you feel a great sense of satisfaction if you get it on the ground. So before we hop in, let's do a little planning. So here is the low altitude chart in Sky Vector for our route. I also have pulled up a SID only for reference. So here is Reno, and we're going to fly the runway heading south until we reach the 62 radial of the Squaw Valley VOR 113.2. So we'll tune that in on our radio before we take off and dial our needle, course needle to 62. And then when we reach this point, the needle center, we'll make our turn and fly towards Squaw Valley. Then we will continue across. Let me just get these in here. Squaw Valley, and then we'll go down to Sacramento, which is 115.2, and notice it automatically put in a SID. I'm going to ignore that. So we'll be flying down to Concord, and then flying into San Francisco on runway 19. And I think it'll be 19 right, if I recall. So if we look at that chart, nope, looks like it's left. So here's Concord. We will fly off of Concord. They're showing the 236 radial, but I have found that this radio in the Saab is not strong enough to pick up the localizer that far out, so we're going to take it more of a gentle angle, maybe 205 radial to pick up that localizer into runway 19 left. So I'm going to write all these frequencies down because when you fly VOR, it's nice to have those ready to go. So let's head back to the airplane. And the lights have come on since we've been doing our planning. So we'll hop into the cockpit. So the cockpit itself looks kind of worn and old and not real big. Just room enough for 2 pilots. So to get things rolling, we'll turn on our GPU, even though we're not going to use it for very long because we're going to need a pushback before we start our engines. But like all flights, we begin with batteries on, external power on. I want to make sure that light is green. And not sure why you do this, but you reset the bleeds, and we'll do that again after the engines get started. and this boot indicator gets turned on. Nothing to do with fuel, it's all auto. So we don't have to turn those switches on. We can turn on temperature for batteries and get our panel lights ready to go. We don't turn on our avionics till we get the engine started. Our main bus we don't turn on until the engines are lit. Lots of beeping. Let's turn on our nav lights and beacon. And then down below we turn on our oxygen, little knob over on the side, and then our condition lever. This is used in turboprops for setting start fuel, idle fuel, cutoff fuel, and also for, I guess, feathering and changing the speed of the prop. So it's a multifunction set of levers there. And that was just a cursory overview, believe me. So we are ready to call for our, let's see, plug-in, pushback, and, wow, this is kind of a mess. Let me see, delete segment. There, I like that one. And we'll leave it there.
Ground to cockpit, plan acknowledged. Call me through the menu when you are ready.
And we're ready, because it's going to take them a second to get here. So we'll start our pushback.
Ground to cockpit, tow is driving up.
And he'll come right through the wall here. So there's really nothing to do until he gets here. We can turn on our seatbelt. And no smoking, of course. We can arm our emergency lights. And there's our tow, just a little guy. See our GPU going on here. We just need to remember to disconnect it. Don't want to drag it with us.
Okay, all doors and hatches are closed. Ready to snap.
Alright, we'll turn on a few lights here. Kind of gloomy. And then
Winging strap and zapper in position. Release parking brake when ready to start pushback.
Alright, let's get rid of our GPU. And brake off. And you can see the nose going up a little bit. And these engines are pretty simple to get started. So once we get the go-ahead,
Starting pushback, and you may start engines.
there we go. So we just flip this over. All these lights go out. Don't be alarmed. It's just what happens. You can see it start to spin. The guy's going a little crazy here. Great to watch. And all these lights will come back on in a second. Alright, and now our other engine. I think our tow is a little crazy, but time to end this. As
Operation complete. Go ahead and set the parking brake.
the engines spool up, we turn on our generators, and we do so with resetting it first and then leave it to on, and then we do that same thing with the bleeds on both sides, and then static pitot on. And I don't think we're going to do anything with icing, de-icing or icing protection right now. On with the main switch.
Tow is disconnected and bypass pin has been removed. Hand signal on the left. We'll see you next time and have fun up there.
And we turn on our 3 radio switches, and you'll see the HSI coming up. And we'll go ahead and turn on the Garmin, even though we're really not going to use it. And we're ready to roll. By the way, you'll hear an interesting little whirring sound, which is the hydraulic pump running. And there's nothing you can do to control that. So condition levers to max. So the condition levers are, again, multifunctional for feathering, for adding fuel, for idling and taxiing. And we'll leave them in that position for takeoff. Probably get some lights on here. A little bit of rain falling. By the way, if I haven't mentioned this before, you want to make sure that you set a key to turn on nose wheel steering. Otherwise, you'll just be heading out into the field or driving right through the terminal. This is a very stable aircraft. It taxis with ease, and when you begin your takeoff run, it stays where you put it. So you can see that we have some interesting weather we're going to be flying into, with only a mile visibility. So we don't have any errors on our center panel there, which is good. Everything is clear, and we'll stop here for a minute and make a couple of last minute adjustments. It's interesting, we only have a mile visibility, but I can see the moon coming up. Stop short of the runway at our double line. Scan our panels here. Need a little more light. Don't think we're going to do anything with our ice protection at this point. We'll wait until we get a warning. Just double checking. Strobe on, landing lights now go on. Don't need our taxi light. Auto coursing goes on. This is the function that will feather a prop if an engine loses power. And we are just checking our VOR. Looks good. We really don't need that magenta line, but you can see that our VOR is set for 262 or 242 from the Squaw Valley VOR. So we'll see how that needle comes into play as we approach the radial. And we'll turn off our ground operations and turn on takeoff inhibitor. In other words, we don't get any warnings. It's not going to freak out with that. And we're just checking position of our levers. And now we're setting our CTOT. This is that self-governing function that will automatically advance the throttles to the set position, which is 90%, once I push them up to 65%. And this is just to prevent what they call bloom. So we've been cleared to the runway. I don't know what happened to our co-pilot. Nice runway lighting here at Reno. As we try to get this thing lined up. Sorry for all of that. And we're just double checking our VOR and making sure that we are pointed to Squaw Valley. And then we might as well set our heading indicator to the runway heading. And then we're going to dial in our cruise altitude. You'll notice we're at 4,300 feet. And we'll set our climb for 41 knots, which will give us a good rate of climb. By the way, you'll notice this airplane will not climb unless you've got your altitude above that which you are taking off from. Did I say that right? All right, advance the throttles. We are cleared for takeoff. And notice how we're going to get some lights on here. I don't know what the problem is. I thought I had those turned on. Well, we'll get to that in a second. We're busy. So I'm increasing the throttles, and you'll notice the bloom. So the CTOT has just taken over. Advance the throttles to 90%. For some reason the takeoff inhibitor was turned off. And we rotate at 110. We just try to keep the wings level and the nose about 18 degrees. And engaging our autopilot. I have a hotkey set for it because it is on the center panel, and if I were to look down, I might end up losing control of the airplane. So I have set a hotkey for it. So we are climbing at 141 knots. So we got a good rate of climb, about 3,000 feet per minute. And we'll turn off our CTOT, and our torque drops a bit, so I've advanced the throttles. You can turn off our auto coursing. And now we just wait for that needle to align with the arrow. Just looking for Squaw Valley here. Well, things brightened up as we get, I guess, closer to the cloud tops. Let's take a look out the window. Not much but rain. Not much for the passengers at this point. They're not going to see a lot on this flight. I've got us pretty well socked in. And we can turn on our prop sync. Whoops, that is a lock. We don't need that, really. That just locks the levers in place. And the flaps have come up. Sorry, I didn't mention that earlier. And now it's just a matter of watching for that VOR. So you'll notice that the VOR is set to Squaw Valley. That's the first VOR there, coming out of the clouds. But the autopilot is set to heading for right now. But when that needle comes down and aligns with our arrow, we'll flip the autopilot from heading to nav. So right now you can see the green light. It says nav L. But no activity yet in that needle. You can see that we are 25 miles approximately from the VOR, but that's if we were to fly directly to it at this point. But we are flying the runway heading. Looking out over the nose. I think that's Lake Tahoe. Passengers get a little view of the landscape. I hope I'm not making you sick by flipping around, but it's more interesting to see out the windows in the back occasionally. So you can see the needle starting to drop, and I've just flipped it to nav, and when that needle is satisfied, the airplane will begin to turn automatically towards that VOR. So it's just a matter of waiting. This airplane does make pretty shallow turns, but there we go. I'm not doing a thing. That is our autopilot. Outside view. And we don't need our landing lights at this point. They can come off at 10,000 legally. Coming over beautiful Lake Tahoe and headed towards the high Sierras. And notice our needle is a little bit to the right, so the airplane is compensating a little bit to try to align that needle. Again, this is VOR navigation. When I learned to fly many years ago, that's about all we had was VOR, and we thought it was pretty cool. But I assume that someday they're going to go away in favor of all the GPS options that are available now. But it's kind of nice to stay in practice. So 18 miles out from the VOR, they call that DME, Distance Measuring Equipment. And it is associated with VORs. Not every VOR has that capability. And we're going to come back a little bit on our props as we climb. Hopefully we won't impede our climb too much. But they need to be between 13 and 1500 RPM. And I'm just watching the temperature there in that center gauge. I want it to be in the around 900. We can let our flight attendants move about the cabin. And we'll set our baro to standard. Just checking everything here. So 1,000 feet to go. Don't have to climb as quickly. Although now it doesn't look like we're climbing it at all. Maybe I need to increase that. Yeah, it'll take us all day to get to the last 600 feet. The Sierra's in late afternoon light. Yeah, let's bump that up a little bit. See the nose come up? It's one of the things that people don't always understand about climbing. It's power that makes an airplane climb. And it's the pitch of the nose that determines speed. So the nose came up to drop it to 137, but now we're already at flight level 200. And we are over Lake Tahoe. That was a big lake. So our next VOR is going to be Sacramento, so we want to make sure that our radios are tuned. So it's already on the bottom portion of our VOR, so we'll just switch, yes. And I need to turn on the second course needle. Then tune it. It's already coming in. In other words, it's picking it up. VOR signal is line of sight. So the higher your altitude, the greater possibility you're going to pick up that VOR. So we might as well head that direction, so activate that number 2 nav radio and turn towards Sacramento. So we are just a little bit past Squaw Valley, headed towards Sacramento. So we are 70 miles out from Sacramento, and I want to go ahead and make sure that we're set for Concord, which is 117.00, so you can see it on the bottom portion of that VOR, so I can just flip it over. Although it's probably better that you have it on the opposite or the inactive nav radio. So we'll deal with that shortly, but down to 68 miles now, 7 miles from Squaw Valley. That number is increasing, and you can see that the arrow is pointing back. That's the turquoise arrow, so that is the from arrow. I like looking out the passenger windows, if you haven't figured that out. By the way, these are X-plane clouds. I am using the real weather connector, but I've got it turned off right now because I've manually set this for low visibility. SkyMac clouds do look better, but they're not as accurate. I've said that before. I hear the new X-Plane 11.3 has much better clouds, among other things. So we're closing in on our VOR at Sacramento. And you can see that next, and then finally Concord, which is 117. And I'll just add Berks to our flight plan. That is our initial approach fix, which we will approach at a very shallow angle. And we need to start thinking about descending, so go over to X-Plane Tools Descent Calculator, one of my own inventions here. So 20,000 feet down to 5,000 feet, which is our initial approach fix altitude. And we'll just kind of guess at our knots here, 260 above 10,000, 250 below, and then we'll descend at 1,500 feet, and that gives us 42.78 miles from the target that we need to begin our descent. Does that make sense? So 42 miles from 5,000 feet, we can begin our descent. So that's just about the Sacramento VOR, just guesstimating. So I'm going to go ahead and set it up for the first radio like I mentioned before. It's a little bit easier just to click those green square buttons, and you can already see that that needle has activated itself. The arrow is pointing forward, so we have a 2 arrow. Let's just align that now using our course knob. And let's set our localizer on our number 1 nav radio, 108.9. I always forget. It's nice to be able to flip back and forth. And we can go ahead and head towards Concord and set our frequency for the localizer in the top position. And let's adjust our course on that first nav radio to the runway heading. It's kind of a little pre-planning. Meanwhile, the green arrow, or the second arrow, is aimed at Concord VOR. And we can now set our initial approach fix altitude 5,000 feet. And we'll begin our descent. So there's a little roll switch there, and you can see in the upper right hand corner of our HSI, I've set 1,500 feet. There's a little down arrow. And we'll come back a little bit on our power. As we begin our descent into San Francisco, you can see our torque is down to about 35%. Prop remains the same, about 1350. So we're now just 5 or so miles out from that Concord VOR. Still 11,000 feet. You can see that I have increased our vertical speed to 2,000. You can see that in the upper corner of the HSI and also in our vertical speed needle. I was just a little concerned about our altitude. Didn't seem like we were losing it quickly enough. So we're about ready to turn towards Berks and intercept our localizer. Adjusting our baro for San Francisco, and pull that up by just rolling over the green pen in Sky Vector. Very handy. Just adjusting our outward course from the VOR. So we're going to make it about 205. Now our chart shows about 230, but these radios I have discovered are not powerful enough to capture a localizer that far out. So we'll just wait for the airplane to align with those needles, indicating we're on the 205 outbound radial from Concord, headed towards an intercept with the localizer at runway 19 left. Yes. So you can see that they are calling for 236 degrees off Concord, but I tried that earlier and it didn't work. I never captured the localizer. So we'll take our chances and hopefully we'll see that localizer roll across shortly. You can see that the glide slope needle is above our current altitude, which is good. We want to fly underneath it. Notice our altitude now is passing 6,000, and we want to expect to capture that localizer about 11 miles out. I think that's what I figured. Still descending now at 1,500 feet per second, or per minute. Yeah, per second we'd have other problems, wouldn't we? So now we're just waiting to see that localizer come alive. We've got the glide slope, so that's a good thing. Our speed has gotten up there, so we need to come back a little bit. And there's our localizer. The needle just moved across, and the airplane is now turning towards the runway and centering that needle. Looks like we overshot it just a little bit, so it will probably overcompensate for a few minutes. So we're turning almost 180 degrees to try to get back on course. And our glide slope is very slowly coming down as we fly under it. And yeah, we're 11 miles out. It's about what I thought we'd be for Berks, but we're still 19 miles from the runway. So we're leveled off at 5,000, waiting for that glide slope to be captured and begin our descent. Let's just get that needle out of the way, turn it off. So now we can just concentrate on our glide slope and localizer, and we're just about lined up. And for landing, we eventually want to push up the condition levers to max. We have to prepare the airplane for the potential go around. And we can turn off our prop sync. And our speed is coming down. And notice we picked up that glide slope. We are descending. Coming back on the speed. So you can see our approach plate, and want to set the go around altitude after we pass below it, of course. So our localizer is right on, and our glide slope is right on. Just a little power management. Forgot to turn the landing lights on. Should have come on at 10,000. Just turned on the flashlight, by the way. My friend Steve laughs at me, but I think it's kind of cool. Alright, we can set our missed approach altitude now that we're below it. We're still a little fast, but we are a ways out. But we can begin to come back a little bit on our power. I'm doing that manually, even though I have a hat switch that is programmed to increase or decrease the throttles. On this airplane, it doesn't seem to work quite as smoothly, so it's better just to do it manually. .3,000 feet. So this runway is at sea level. Now, if I were a passenger, I might be a little disconcerted. Oops, our throttles came back a little too much. But our speed has dropped down to about 130 knots. Our radial altimeter, you can see in the lower left-hand corner of the HSI is just about 100 feet different than our altitude. Now that the gear is down, we can turn on those lights. And now we're just looking for that runway. Just watching our speed. Our localizer and glide slope are still where they should be. Our descent is down to about 600 feet per minute. In other words, everything looks pretty good. Now, if we can just find that runway, I think we'll be in good shape. Again, I have used the manual option for the weather to dial this down to runway visual range of 6,000 feet. I don't even know if this airplane is rated to make that kind of landing. Again, we want to prepare the airplane for a potential go-around, so we'll set it up as though we were taking off with auto Corson and our CTOT. Coming up on 1,000 feet. Still no runway. You have to believe your instruments. It's one of the first things they teach you when you're learning to fly. Just believe your instruments and not your instincts. At least in these conditions. Alright, I can see some runway lights. Coming into view. And we'll pull back a little bit more on our throttle. We want to be about 100 knots. There it is. And judging from our PAPI lights, our glide slope is right on the money. So this is 19 left, you can see 19 right, just to the right of this runway, which makes total sense. They seem close together. Alright, I've turned off the autopilot. And I'm just going to try to hand fly this down. So we're at 100 100 knots. Not quite in the center, but we've got it down. And we'll use our reverse prop and slow this guy down. Alright, I've saved us a little time and taxied down the runway, and now we're pulling off onto the taxiway. And before we go too far, we need to stop and clean up the airplane. So we need to get beyond the double line, and we'll stop here and take care of a little business. So we'll be putting up the flaps. Can't see it, but they are going up. I wonder if pilots like flying in this kind of weather. I wonder if they like the challenge. You can see the flaps going up there with the flap handle, and now let's turn off our landing lights. Didn't realize the taxi lights were so bright. We're lighting up San Francisco, or the terminal at San Francisco. So strobe off, and let's continue our taxi. Normally this type of airplane, a commuter would not be parking where there is a jetway. There's usually some more remote option, but for want of a better place, I'll just sneak in here at gate 54A. And notice we don't even have a marshaller here. I guess commuter jets or prop jets don't get any respect. I should have turned off my taxi light. Oh my gosh, that is bright. So now we just need to come to a stop and then move our condition levers down to fuel off and pull our throttles back to ground idle. Whoops, need to get the GPU going. Lost my power. That was not good. Alright, let's get out of here. This model actually has a working door. Requires a little manual intervention here. Swing the flight attendant seat out of the way and slide the steps over. I like the sound of the springs. And let our passengers out. So thanks for joining me, indulging me in this IFR flight. If you have any questions or comments, make them below. Otherwise, until next time, happy simming.